spoke to a man who is now in his 30s who worked there when he was a minor back in 2001. So this has been going on for a long time. Just the amount of blood and guts that these kids are working in is just insane.
Lauren Gurley is a labor reporter for the Washington Post, a member of the union there, the Washington Post Guild, and our guest this morning. Lauren, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I appreciate it. Happy to have you. So your story is about what, when people think about child labor, I guess, or the way that I think about it and who should be punished is that I think that the bosses are the most responsible. I think that most people, when they think about that, that's who they think as well should be the recipient of the harshest penalties that our society doles out when 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds work at all, frankly, earn a profit for somebody at all, but particularly when they're working in dangerous facilities. We think that the management of the enterprise should be held responsible primarily. But your story in the Washington Post talks about how that's not necessarily the case. But before we get into that, can you talk to us generally about what happened at Packers Sanitation?
Yeah. So I would like to start off by saying there's been like I don't know if you've talked about this on your show at all, but there's been like a steep rise in child labor violations since 2015, which is when they hit a record low, but they've basically quadrupled since 2015. And there have been a number of pretty astonishing cases that have come out this year that, people who've worked in the child labor space say they've like never heard of stuff like this happening in the United States, even, over the past few decades. But there was child labor found in the Hyundai supply chain in, I believe, Alabama and other states in the South, which you may have talked about on your show.
Yes.
And there was this year a Department of Labor raid and investigation into Packer Sanitation Services, which is the largest, one of the largest food safety sanitation companies in the United States, that found 102 minors, children, working in meatpacking slaughterhouses, facilities around the United States in 8 states, I believe. And that finding came out this year in January. And the kids were like as young as 13 and 14. A lot of them, we learned in our investigation, were unaccompanied minors from Guatemala, who had recently arrived in the United States. And the way this all sort of was, I guess, discovered was because some teachers at local middle schools and high schools reported, seeing burns on students and hearing that they were like burns and like, what is the word? Open wounds on children's bodies. And sort of had to report that to the authorities. And then it became clear that, this had actually been going on in at least the town that I went to, Grand Island, Nebraska, for the past 20 years. So we went to Grand Island and ended up talking to some of the guardians of the kids involved in this.
Yeah, and they found, the Labor Department officials found, they were able to confirm 102, children working at this facility. But they said it's up to as many or even more than 5 times more than that, because they can only, quote, they can only confirm so much.
Exactly. The regional Chicago administrator for the Department of Labor told us, like, it was extremely clear just hanging out outside the facility, going into the facility, that a lot of people looked extremely young. And, their investigation is sort of to prove that this is happening at a company, but it is not under the Department of Labor's it's not part of their job, I guess, to like make sure that every single person in the facility who's a minor isn't there anymore. It's sort of up to the company to follow the law. So they said there could have easily been many more kids than 102 working in these plants. And I guess I should mention that they were working the midnight shift. So these were shifts that ran from about 11 p.m. to around 6 a.m. Can you imagine, 13 and 14-year-olds working from 11 to 6 a.m. and then going to school? That was what was happening. They're falling asleep in class. I think that was all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I obviously, I think that children as young as 12 or 13 shouldn't be working really anywhere, making a profit for somebody anywhere. I think that, they need to be in school. They need to be, playing, basketball outside of school, right? These are the things that 12, 13-year-olds need to be doing. But where there is such danger, it's important to also point that out, just to add to the understanding of how egregious what happened here. And you wrote in your article, quote, "The Grand Island teens had been hired to scour blood and beef fat from the slippery, quote, kill floor using high-pressure hoses, scalding water, and industrial foams and acids. They sanitized electric knives, fat skinners, and 190-pound saws used to split cow carcasses, according to court records. Some students suffered chemical burns and were so sleep deprived after working their shift that they dozed off in classes." And the girl that you spoke to is actually one of those that had that faced injuries as well. You said that she that the middle school found chemical burns, blisters, and open wounds on her hands, plural, presumably, I guess, and one knee. The girl said that the wounds had been caused by cleaning chemicals that soaked through her gloves and clothes. I mean, this is just insane stuff here.
Truly. I mean, going through those court records, man, there's just so much in there that is so gruesome. I talked to people we spoke to a man who is now in his 30s who worked there back in 2001. And he was just talking about he worked there when he was a minor back in 2001. So this has been going on for a long time. Just the amount of cow parts and blood and guts that, these kids are working in is just insane. It was interesting speaking to this young girl who worked there. She's now 14, but she was 13 when she worked there. She sort of the family, the judge, and who was sort of prosecuting the attorney that's prosecuting the parents, and the girl sort of gave very differing accounts. The girl was like, "Oh, it wasn't that bad," but she's only like 13 or 14. It was hard to get a real description from her. And then the court records just, make things sound like insane. There was it was interesting to get all these different perspectives. There's a lot going on in terms of the family and the girl and sort of their story versus what the prosecutor and the judge were saying.
Right. Yeah, and I want to go into some of this, some of the dynamics there that exist between these people and the law enforcement. I guess, we don't really think of labor officials as law enforcement, but in a way, they're enforcing laws. But I wanted to point out, because this is an interesting piece in your article, that the company, this isn't their first run with a country's labor officials about child labor. The meatpacking plant is owned by a Brazilian company, and in 2016, the Brazilian government fined this same company for illegally employing children, and in 2021, a Brazilian anti-slavery group accused the company of buying cattle from ranches that use slave labor. So, despite the fact that in these court documents, the company folks try us say that these are like rogue individuals that are, that are doing this, and your account from this person who worked as a minor in 2001, their behavior in other countries. I mean, this seems like this is a pattern of behavior, we could say.
Right. I mean, so JBS is the plant that the girl worked at who I spoke to. And JBS, like you said, Brazilian-based company, but one of the largest, if not the largest, meat processing company in the world. They basically, faced no penalties for this because it was actually a contractor, a sanitation contractor, Packer Sanitation Services, that was employing and hiring these kids. So they walked away entirely, I mean, except for maybe their reputation, unscathed from this. They paid no fines. They faced no criminal charges. And even the Department of Labor did not blame them for this. They're like, this is your contractor's fault, which is, sort of the rise of the contracting labor model has made it such that, big brand name companies can sort of often, aren't the ones liable or responsible under the law when things like this happen.
Right. And so, circling back to this relationship, the dynamic between the family and people who are really, when we think about child labor laws, we think about protecting children. That's the purpose of these laws, presumably, right? And yet, these people are so afraid of coming forward. I mean, help is available to these folks in certain, you mentioned in your article that as potential victims of human trafficking, the underage workers might be entitled to federal assistance, buying groceries, paying rent, stuff like this. And yet, the mother of this girl, who can't read or write in any language, much less English, said she was afraid that the government would take her children away if the family accepted the money, which seems like, not an unreasonable fear, given that her husband is in jail now and she's headed to jail.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a totally legitimate fear. The Department of Homeland Security, sent out a letter offering these kids, work a pathway to, work permits and to sort of be assurance that they wouldn't be deported. And not a single family as of last week had accepted. They'd received this letter months ago, and, not a single family of these kids had accepted it. And part of the problem was they're offering these protections to the kids, but they're not offering them to the entire family, right? And so these families are mostly undocumented. And so people are terrified, and for good reason, right? Like you said, like it is possible that this woman, the mother of this girl that we spoke to, could, lose her kids or be deported or, be punished in some way for, I mean, it's already happening. So there's a lot of distrust. And I think especially a lot of the people are from Guatemala. There's already like a deep distrust of, institutions and government for a good reason as well. And so it's just this wild situation where the Department of Labor went in and sort of, they're the heroes of the story in some way, but on the other side of it, we don't know if these kids are safe. In fact, we know that some of them left town, some of them dropped out of school. There is no one knows if they're safe, or maybe they're just working, at another meat packing plant under another name, from the next state over. So there's really the Department of Labor, their mission is sort of to enforce child labor laws, but that's just like making sure that kids aren't working in meat plants. Once that's certain, it's just like not in their mission to make sure that kids are safe, or they can try to help them and set them up with resources, but they really aren't, there's no one looking out for these 102 minors now.
And you said that the Labor Department made that explicit to you. You said that they said caring for minors is not part of the Labor Department's mission.
Right. Which is pretty, I was pretty shocked by that.
I mean, that's just so bizarre to me. Why would I can't imagine being if I were, I have some amount of interest as, in maybe one day working for the Labor Department. It would be to help working people. That would be, my own personal mission, maybe if it's not like enshrined, above my desk or whatever. But that's just so backwards, it seems to me, that, we're only going to enforce the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the thing. And the spirit of the thing, to me, is protecting children.
Right. The spirit of the law and what it says is that it's protecting children's, opportunities for education, their well-being, and their health and safety. And, there's really, as far as we could tell, there's really no, besides the fact that the raid itself happened, there's really no assurance that those three things are sort of, those education, well-being, health, and safety of those kids are guaranteed at all. So it was very interesting for me to hear that from the Labor Department. They did. I mean, I don't know if some of your listeners have also seen the New York Times expose that came out that by Hannah Dreier last week or the week before. But after that came out, the Department of Labor sort of immediately held a press conference and were like, okay, we're teaming up with HHS, Health and Human Services, to sort of fill some of these gaps, or to make sure that we're actually like following up with unaccompanied minors and making sure that, if they call us, that we're giving them calls back. If they call us with concerns, that we're giving them calls back. That sounds like a very basic thing, but I guess they weren't doing that before. There's this Biden administration has sort of announced a broader crackdown on child labor over the past week or so. And when we reached out to the Labor Department for comment about, what are you doing to ensure these kids are safe? They're like, well, we're taking additional steps now, or we're trying to sort of do cross interagency or collaboration between agencies, which of course is, often very difficult to get.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it sounds to me like, I don't know, it sounds to me like some of that collaboration should have already been in place, and it shouldn't have taken, getting to this level before the agencies are helping each other out. Because in fairness to the DOL, I understand what they're saying about, the specific aspects of their mission and their work, and they're not necessarily equipped to make sure those kids have a healthy, safe educational life. But come on now, there's other government agencies that you work with and that you should be working with, HHS and Department of Education and all that. So, I would hope that there's going to be a lot more collaboration to ensure that not just are we enforcing these child labor laws, but making sure these families and these children are taken care of. And, that's, to me, the saddest part of the whole story is that there are families who have to resort to this in the first place. And it shouldn't be that way in the wealthiest country on the history of the planet. It just shouldn't be that way, that we feel compelled to send our children to work. But yeah, I'm glad to hear there is now more collaboration on the way. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Talking to people in the community, and this has been happening in this sort of industrial town. It's the third largest city in Nebraska for decades, we've found, but that they've been hiring kids to clean the slaughterhouse. Most people, like most family, the kids genuinely really want to work. In fact, we talk to people coming from unaccompanied minors coming from Guatemala, they will tell you that they're coming to the United States specifically to work. The only reason why because they need to, the kids, crossing the border, I guess right now, like Coyote's fees range from like $6,000 to like $10,000. The kids, in order to come to the United States, their families take out loans against their property in Guatemala, to pay for these trips. And if they don't pay these loans back, like the families can lose their property. And so kids really come here wanting to work. They're like, wow, I can make $18 an hour compared to like $50 a week in Guatemala. And so it's just very interesting talking to people in the local community. Like they think a lot of people felt like, what the Department of Labor did was like devastating for these kids because they lost that source of income. So it's very complex when you think about it sort of in a transnational sense as well.
Right. Yeah. And you know, how do you, certainly, you know, you can't fault the kids, obviously, and it's difficult, it's difficult to even fault the parents and some, you know, you said that, you know, the father or the stepfather is, you know, he's now in prison for child abuse charges because he drove, you know, the girl to work. But, you know, I mean, they were pushed there by, you know, the desperation that they felt, you know, in their home country. But then even here, you know, it wasn't like he was able to work enough to make it such that his daughter didn't need to, right?
Right. In fact, this man himself, the judge said in his sentencing that this man has been working since he was in first grade, the stepfather. So,
Wow.
you know, in Guatemala. Yeah, they still threw him into jail, but the judge said he definitely like weighed that as like a factor in the sentencing. He's like, this man has been working since he was, you know, 5 or 6. And so there's like cultural differences here. Or I mean, it's not even cultural. It's just like basic economic needs.
Yeah, cultural and material. But yeah, I mean, and you know, to a certain extent, like if he was working at 5 or 6 and then his daughter starts working at 12, well, you know, I mean, it's like progress, I guess, in a certain sense, right? But it's, yeah, it's just such a sad story. And so, you know, I mean, I don't know if they're, you know, what do you think that would be, or what are some of the solutions that some, you know, advocacy groups are putting out about this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the local advocacy, like immigration groups and advocacy groups in Nebraska, can't even get the names of the kids from the Department of Labor. Like, Department of Labor contacted groups, a number of them, and said, hey, like, there are these kids out there. Can you provide them resources? And these groups said, well, can you give us the kids' names? And they said, well, sorry, that is, you know, confidential information. We can't share the names of minors. So basically the kids, you know, no one can really help them. So I think a lot of the groups, some of whom are a lot of nonprofits, some of whom are like literally government contractors, are saying that, you know, they should have contact information for these kids so that they can help them. I think, you know, the solution I've heard is just like, you know, more interagency collaboration, more follow up with kids, like making sure that instead of just offering the aid to the kid themselves, you offer it to their entire family. You say, you know, this entire family is now protected from being deported or has work authorization. And that way, kids are more likely to families are more likely to accept the aid.
Because in the other instance, you're basically asking this 12-year-old child in a country that they don't know, that they're not from, to abandon their family.
Right, exactly. And so no one's accepting it. And it's just bizarre. I mean, talking to this mother who received these papers with this offer for her child, like she can't even read the papers. So it's just like, what? Of course, no one's going to accept this. Like, I don't know how many other families are in this exact same situation, but just like the lack of foresight into sort of how this is playing out just seems, it was astonishing to us.
Lauren, thanks for taking the time with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great to be on. Have a great weekend.
Appreciate it. You too.
Lauren Gurley is a labor reporter for the Washington Post. She is a member of the Washington Post Guild, the union there. You can follow her on Twitter at Lauren K. Gurley. Lauren K. Gurley on Twitter, and obviously you can find her work in the Washington Post. She was previously working for Vice Motherboard. You can find a lot of her stuff there as well. So
yeah, I really appreciate her work. I have a very love-hate relationship with the Washington Post, primarily the hate side of it. But I really do enjoy Lauren's work, and she's doing some good work there. And, you know, I can't help but think of the Hyundai situation here because of the contractor situation, right? It seems like whenever we uncover these stories, the company itself, who ultimately is reaping the benefits from their exploitation, it's insulated by hiring these temp agencies and staff agencies to do the hiring for them. Yeah. It's just, layers of bureaucracy that are inserted to insulate people from real accountability. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to hear that, the parents of these kids are being punished and being thrown in cages when the folks who profited off this walk away scot-free. And meanwhile, you've got governors in other states pushing to loosen child labor laws, like in Arkansas, Governor Sanders, Huckabee Sanders. She's a champion right now of loosening child labor laws, and we're seeing it all over the country. And it's just
I think I saw a picture of her signing that law surrounded by children.
It's just it's dystopian, and as people in our chat have been talking about here during the interview, it is very much a return to the Gilded Age. And in one area after another in our country, our economy, our society, we seem intent on going back to the Gilded Age, and there are politicians who are more than eager to bring us there.
Yeah, but you mentioned that contracting stuff. She mentioned in her article that she said in the interview that the meatpacking plant itself, the company JBS, did not face any penalties at all. The contractor, Packers Sanitation, faced no criminal charges. No criminal charges. The parents of these children are going to jail
for child abuse.
And there's no criminal charges on this sanitation company. They did have to pay a $1.5 million civil fine, but this is in the context of hundreds of millions. I'm trying to...
who gets the money? Obviously, right. The family, the child is not going to benefit from the fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, I'm trying to figure out how much they made in a year, and I'm having trouble figuring
I'm guessing
out.
That $1.5 million fine was the cost of doing business and not at all
Either way, I'm getting two wildly different numbers, to be fair. One number from Zappia says Packer Sanitation Services peak revenue was $460 million in 2021. But then Rocket Reach says their revenue was $2.7 billion. So I don't know which one is right. But either way, even at the lower end, $400 million, 1.5, that is less. That is a fraction of 1% of the operating revenue of this company for 1 year. And this is for fines for years. It's less than 1% of their revenue for a single year that this company is at the maximum having to pay, right? And no criminal penalties, like I said. Whereas the families of these children have been convicted of child abuse. I mean, it's just a clown world, a disgusting society.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap my head around it, and it's just really, really disturbing to see the revival of child labor as an accepted practice now, as something that we're just supposed to get used to. And I mean, the company could employ adults.
Right.
The company could pay adults fair wages and provide decent working conditions. They could do that. Yeah. That is an option on the table. Just so everyone's clear, I know there's been a lot of whining and moaning in the last few years from the business class that, nobody wants to work anymore, they say. But there are tried and true methods to recruit employees and retain employees. It is not rocket science. Right. So, it is disturbing. I hate to see the disparity in the justice here. There is no justice here, and it's sad to see that. And I think we need to see a lot more from the Biden administration on this. Apparently, as Lauren mentioned, they're going to do a renewed push in light of some of this news, but it shouldn't take this news to do that. And it shouldn't take this news to get agencies to collaborate. So much more needs to be done, and we need to see some people being made examples of, not parents, not kids, employers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, seriously, if we are going to be a society that puts humans in cages, then the bosses need to go to jail. That's who needs to go to jail in these scenarios, the bosses. They need to go to jail. The children need to get full and complete amnesty. Their families need to get permanent status. Money to pay rent for a year or something. I mean, seriously, there needs to be, and all the money for that needs to come from the revenue of these companies. That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. But that's not going to happen.
And
we live in a clown world.
Something that somebody in our comment section brought up that I think is really, really worth me saying is that if the U.S. didn't destabilize so much of Latin America in the first place, we wouldn't have so much of this going on, right? Because there are push and pull factors regarding immigration.
Yeah.
And nobody, particularly on right-wing radio and, right-wing media, they love to make a lot of hay about immigration, and they like to stir up nativist sentiments, but never once will they ever discuss American involvement in the region and how that could facilitate this immigration drive. They never want to talk about that. They never want to talk about the governments that have been overthrown. They never want to talk about the free trade agreements that have been in place. They never want to talk about the multinational corporations exploiting in those areas, or the way U.S. drug wars have fueled violence and criminal gangs. They don't want to talk about that because it draws too many questions about the way we do things.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.